The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is travelling back to the region today. Jordan has said its foreign minister is going to tell him that Israel needs to stop now, and that Israel's action in Gaza is pushing the region towards a wider regional war that threatens world peace. We're also going to be hearing from Hezbollah speaking at 1 o'clock UK time later today. How concerned are you about the impact this might have more broadly outside of it, just Israel and Gaza?
As far as the region is concerned, I think you're right. It's the speech by Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, probably coming at 1 p.m. our time, which will be very indicative, because if in any sense Hezbollah starts to get seriously involved, so far it's not been involved in a major way, then that basically opens up another front. And the last time that happened in 2006, the Israelis actually occupied part of southern Lebanon. They had to fall back in some disarray and went for a mass bombing of key targets throughout Lebanon. I think Hezbollah wants to try and avoid that now, but itself is under pressure because of what is happening in Gaza. We're now, as I think you're reporting, over 9,000 people killed, including probably 3,000 children. And that is having a very big effect on what people jokingly call the Arab street, public opinion across the Middle East, and indeed wider than that. And I think basically Blinken's visit today, which is highly significant, is really to try and persuade the Israelis to rein it in and slow things down. Because worldwide support for Israel, which was huge after the 7th of October, that terrible day, is really fading away rapidly, very rapidly. And I think this has caused concern to the Biden administration. So today, in many ways, is a key day with Nasrallah's speech and Blinken's trip to Israel. We hope that some good will come out of it, but one can't be sure.
Earlier on, we spoke to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. He is a spokesperson for the IDF. Now, he was saying, he was pretty defiant. He said only half the tanks have been sent in. The strategic operation continues. I asked him, and I made the point that simply Israel cannot afford to fight on two fronts, to fight in Gaza against Hamas and also to fight against Hezbollah. Also, your point is very valid about public opinion in that area. Israel also doesn't seem to be willing to sanction any kind of humanitarian pause or indeed a ceasefire.
Well, I think the background to this is you go back to the events of 7th of October, which caught the Israelis by an appalling surprise. I mean, it was a huge thing for them. Yes, many Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in the 4 previous wars over the last 15 years, but that didn't have much effect in Israel. When it lost its own sense of security, it meant that the government of the day, a very hawkish government under Netanyahu, felt able to go much farther than it would otherwise do. And it's interesting you were speaking to an IDF specialist, somebody from the military, because essentially Israel domestically is really under pretty high levels of security at present. I was speaking to a former colleague who speaks Hebrew and Arabic, and he's been watching the media there. And the government media basically is very heavily controlled, very heavily censored in many ways, other media less so. But the point is, I think we're now seeing the military probably getting concerned, because it's proving more difficult to go into Gaza than they expected. They've taken losses. They've been at it for, a week now. And essentially, meanwhile, the tide of opinions are moving against Israel. And I think Blinken is going to try and say to them privately, whatever he says in public, which will be very friendly, in private, I think it'll be very different. It'll be saying, for heaven's sake, you've got at least to have some proper humanitarian pauses, at least for a short time. That's my guess. It'd be interesting to see whether he gets the backing from Britain, which has been really quite silent on this the last few days.
Yeah, Israel insisting that it doesn't stop until it has eradicated Hamas.
Right.
And the position being taken by Sir Keir Starmer here was that if you have a ceasefire, that halts the situation as it is, and it doesn't prevent Hamas from carrying out future attacks. And we heard from Hamas, didn't we, this week, Paul, that it would do this all over again. It would repeat the October the 7th acts again and again and again. Does that statement then vindicate Israel in its position here?
If anything, it probably does the opposite, because essentially Hamas is not something that you can defeat in the conventional sense. It's an idea. And there are tens of thousands of young Palestinians in Gaza who are extremely angry at what they've experienced over the last 10 or 15 years. Very difficult to accept this. Believe me, that is what the reality is. And essentially, many of them would join Hamas. And frankly, if Israel believes it can more or less crush Hamas, it may appear to do that. But what it will do is produce many tens of thousands and more potential members, either of Hamas or whatever takes its place. At roots, this has got to end in talks. And it's very difficult to see this because of what Israel has experienced. 7th of October was absolutely disastrous for them, but it's still the case. And somehow wise counsel has got to try and prevail. Very difficult, but I think this is going to be one of Blinken's jobs today, and probably one of the most difficult tasks he's faced since he became Secretary of State.
And how much of this is to blame at the feet of Netanyahu? The fact is, as far as I understand, he wouldn't sanction a two-state solution. That has to be the answer, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the trouble is, if you look at, he's the head of Likud, the main sort of hardline party. If you look at the Likud statement, it says specifically that the only thing that is acceptable is an Israeli sovereignty from the river to the sea. So in other words, Likud says there cannot be a Palestinian state. There can't be sort of a split state solution. It's actually in the original charter. And so you happen to have this particular party in charge with a couple of ultra-nationalist religious parties supporting it, and it needs them because of the electoral arithmetic, means that you have an unusually sort of hardline party. I'm trying to use my words carefully here. And that party feels that it can go much farther than normal simply because of the shock that Israel has experienced. So this is why it's such a difficult position, and which is why, as I say, Blinken's trip today is going to be very significant.
Professor Paul Rogers, thanks very much indeed for